Okay, here we go with week number 3 for advanced quantitative research design. I'm going to be doing a brief lecture here, and then following this are going to be several different lectures. Well, not lectures, videos. My goal here is by the end of this lecture, and certainly by the end of the next meeting, to really have you caught up on the main types of statistical tests. Now, last class, we talked about the different types of quantitative research designs, and we talked about descriptive. Now, descriptive usually has with it the average. So usually when you have a descriptive study, you are trying to find out what the averages are for different groups, for different populations. Averages, average IQ scores, average income, that sort of thing. Now, often connected with averages is something called the standard deviation. And the standard deviation basically talks about how much the population varies from the average. So if you think about if you were using an average to describe a population, you would want to know first off what the average is. So let's say we were studying average income for a certain town. First off, we would want to know the average income, but we would also want to get a sense of how much does the town vary. So, if the average income is $52,000 a year, we would want to know next: do people in the town tend to make around that much, or is there a lot of variation? So, what you would want to do is understand how much variation there is in your population. So you would want to know the average, and then you would want to know, do the majority of people sort of stay around that average, or is there a lot of variation? Does it sort of is there a lot of differences between the members of the population? And that's called, so you have the averages, as we talked about last session, and then you have what is called standard deviation. And I'll be putting that in the materials that we have there then, or the videos that I have after this. So I want to make sure you're understanding mean, standard deviation, and then mean and standard deviation make up a large part of the main statistical tests that are used in research, in quantitative research. In order to understand which test you use, you have to understand the difference between an independent variable and dependent variable, because in a research study, you are looking at the impact of variables. So you are looking to see how one variable impacts another variable. So if you are looking at how different types of, as we brought up before, if you're looking at the difference in income level between males and females, your independent variable is gender, and your dependent variable is income level. And what you are wanting to, and so in that case, you would have two groups, males and females, and you would be looking at, does the income level of this one group differ significantly from the income level of this other group? And when you have just two groups that you are comparing, that is called a t-test. You would use a t-test to determine if there's a significant difference between two groups, males and females income level. So the dependent variable is income level, and the independent variable is gender. And the way you can remember that is the dependent variable is the variable that you are looking to see if it is dependent on the other one. So when you're sitting there saying, okay, my research question is, does income level depend on gender? Is income level impacted by gender, or in other words, is income level dependent on gender? So that would be a t-test. Now, let's say instead that you want, and it's a small t-test. Now, let's say instead you wanted to look at income level, which would again be dependent variable, but you wanted to look at dependent level as you would want to look at income level and to see whether it is dependent on level of education. So you would want to look at, does income level differ significantly between people with no high school education, college education, and graduate school education? So no high school graduation, high school graduation, college graduation, graduate school education. So one variable, one independent variable, but instead of two groups, it'd be four groups. So you'd be looking at income level to see whether it differs significantly between those four groups. And that is called an ANOVA, ANOVA, all capital letters. And that stands for analysis of variance. So analysis of variance is what is called an ANOVA. And then with an ANOVA, you can get kind of complicated. You can actually have multiple dependent variables and multiple independent variables with an ANOVA. And then we also talked last week about correlational studies, and that's where you see whether two variables, you don't see whether they differ in between different groups of the variables, but you just see whether the two variables relate to each other, whether they both go up at the same time or one goes up at the same time while the other one goes down. And that is called a correlational study. So you are looking at whether the variables correlate with each other. Okay, what is going to follow now are a series of videos where these issues are discussed much more in depth. So I want you to do, this is my brief introduction. I want you to watch those variables, and I really want you to pay attention to whether you have any questions, because this is getting you through the basic parts. This is an advanced quantitative course, but I really need to get you through the basics. So I want you to watch all the videos and then come prepared to post any questions that you have on the discussion board, and I will come prepared to clarify those when we meet on Thursday.